What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode. Dr. Mike Axler here, PhD in kinesiology and applied physiology, professor of exercise science, and 60-plus time marathoner and ultramarathoner. Let me ask you all a question. Are you an ultra runner? Can you consider yourself an ultramarathoner? Or perhaps are you a budding ultramarathoner? Are you one of those people, and it's okay, you can hide it, I'm not looking at you right now. Are you one of those people who tells every single person that you're training for a 100-miler or you're training for a 24-hour race because you listened to some David Goggins podcast, you saw some Nick Bare post, and you thought you could totally do that too? Whatever the case, and if that's your goal, if that's your ambition, that's awesome. Maybe this video can help you today. And I've had the opportunity to run 20 ultras in around 2 years, from 50K races to 24-hour races and everything in between. The 50-miler is definitely my favorite distance. I can't say that I loved every minute of it because that would be an odd thing to say about ultras, but I certainly learned a lot. And I made incredible friends and even better memories along the way. I traveled to some cool places. I really tested my mind and my body, and I would implore all of you at some point to run a marathon or an ultramarathon just to go through the experience because it's really, really wonderful. And I think the coolest part for me was the education involved. I did most of my ultras during my PhD, and my PhD is in kinesiology and applied physiology. We studied how nutrition affects the cardiovascular system. And I also did a lot of work with strength and conditioning and sports nutrition. So everything that I do involves this back here. And this is why I make these videos and why I go to the gym and why I run ultra marathons, because I just think it's brilliant and I want to keep learning and I want to keep growing and I want to help all of you do that too. So the education was awesome. Before, during, and after all of my races, my mind would be swirling with questions and ideas about pacing, my gait, my stride mechanics, fueling, hydration, sweat rate, and much more. And further, as I've coached runners over the years from 5Ks to 100-milers and beyond, I feel that I've given them much more practical insight than I ever gave myself, because I made so many mistakes along the way, but that's trial through fire, right? So in this video today, this is for anyone who's curious about the science of endurance. So recreational runners, ultra marathoners, coaches, and physiology buffs alike, and really anyone who wants to understand what actually happens inside the body when the miles really start to stack up. The goals for this episode are to break down how ultra endurance, stress specifically, shifts physiological systems beyond conventional exercise science. And this is an interesting point here, is that a lot of what I learned about in my undergrad and my master's, and then according to my PhD, was all like, oh, what happens when you exercise for 30 minutes on a treadmill? It's like, no, let's go out for 12 hours, let's go out for 24 hours, let's go out for a 2-day race or a 3-day race. So this completely supersedes any of the exercise research, which I think is brilliant. We are getting it on the ground floor. We're all learning right now. So I think this is amazing to talk about. We'll be talking about how the body adapts and how the body accordingly struggles across systems like muscle metabolism, brain chemistry, hydration, and inflammation. We'll also be highlighting evidence-based strategies to buffer fatigue, to improve performance and enhance your recovery. And we'll also make the complex science accessible, engaging, and applicable to real-world training. Alrighty, what we'll cover in 6 big sections. Number 1 is muscle breakdown and catabolism. What happens when glycogen runs out and your body starts mining its own tissues for energy? Second, fuel system transitions and fat oxidation, the metabolic pivot that defines ultra endurance. Third, we'll discuss central fatigue and brain chemistry, how your brain chemistry flips the switch on motivation, drive, and even perception. Number 4, inflammation, hydration, and electrolyte losses. We'll talk about why your gut, why your kidneys, and how your sweat rate becomes performance gatekeepers. That's incredibly important to discuss hydration in terms of ultra endurance events and just staying on the race course and out of trouble. Number 5, we'll detail psychological adaptation and mental fatigue. We'll discuss mental resilience, emotional intelligence, and how your mindset can win or lose the race. And lastly, number 6, practical takeaways for fueling, pacing, and training smarter for long duration efforts. So, if that sounds interesting, let's begin with section 1 on muscle breakdown and catabolism. First off, glycogen stores deplete after around 90 to 120 minutes. After that hour and a half to 2 hour mark of sustained effort, muscle glycogen stores, especially in your type 1 fibers, which are your slow twitch fibers, begin to deplete, triggering a metabolic shift. Glycogen depletion impairs calcium handling and excitation-contraction coupling, which reduces force output and increases ratings of perceived exertion. So running just feels harder and harder and harder, as any of you can know after the hour and a half to 2 hour mark. As glycogen drops, the body then needs to pivot toward fat oxidation and amino acid catabolism to maintain ATP production, a shift that is efficient but slower and much more stressful on muscle tissue. And we know that in marathons, glycogen depletion is the primary limiter of pace and endurance in later stages of racing. When glycogen is low, the liver has to ramp up gluconeogenesis from amino acids. And gluconeogenesis, if you don't know what that term means, if you just break that apart, gluconeogenesis, we're creating glucose from non-glucose precursors. And in this sense, we're discussing amino acids, which come from proteins. So when glycogen is low and you're running out of carbohydrates, the liver ramps up gluconeogenesis from amino acids, especially the BCAAs like leucine, isoleucine, and valine, to stabilize your blood glucose or your blood sugar. BCAAs are catabolized directly in skeletal muscle, bypassing the liver, which is a unique feature that makes them a preferred emergency substrate during long duration exercise. And this process is amplified in athletes with low carbohydrate intake or poor fueling strategies, which increases the risk of muscle damage and fatigue, such that prolonged endurance stress triggers proteolysis, especially when energy intake is insufficient, leading to net muscle loss if not countered by adequate protein synthesis. Creatine kinase, or CK, and lactate dehydrogenase, LDH, both of those levels spike after endurance events or ultra endurance events, reflecting muscle membrane disruption and tissue damage. Severe cases can progress to rhabdo or rhabdomyolysis, if you've ever heard of that, where muscle cells rupture and release myoglobin into the bloodstream, potentially causing chronic kidney damage, which could require months of recovery. And research from Tiller et al. In 2019 found that ultra-endurance athletes often consume only 36 to 53% of their energy needs during races, which is going to exacerbate this catabolic stress. Now, protein intake during and after ultra events can mitigate breakdown and accelerate recovery. Ingesting 5 to 10 grams of protein per hour during racing has been shown to improve nitrogen balance and reduce post-race soreness. So combining protein with carbohydrates enhances muscle protein synthesis and glycogen resynthesis, which is a strategy especially useful in multi-stage events. So that is, first off, what happens when you keep running and running and running past 90 to 120 minutes. We are going to have muscle breakdown and some sort of catabolism, but we need to counteract that with some protein and carbs along the way. Already the second section, fuel system transitions and fat oxidation. The body increases reliance on fat oxidation as glycogen runs low. As exercise continues and glycogen depletes, the body shifts from carbohydrates to fat as the primary fuel source, a concept described by the crossover point where fat oxidation increases and carbohydrate use declines. And we've talked about this in several videos known as metabolic flexibility, where we burn off both fat and carbs. This metabolic shift becomes especially apparent during prolonged, moderate intensity endurance exercise, typically after 90 to 120 minutes, when muscle glycogen stores are significantly reduced. And this is something we've talked quite a bit on this channel, this idea of metabolic flexibility, which gets increased and more efficient when we become aerobically trained with zone 2 training. This is just an example when athletes utilize the physiological adaptation to a much, much greater degree. While fat yields, or dietary fat yields around 9 kilocalories per gram in comparison with carbs where you only get 4 kilocalories per gram, fat is going to be less efficient for quick energy because fat oxidation requires significantly more oxygen per unit of ATP produced. This slower rate of energy release means athletes must reduce intensity if relying primarily on fat. Otherwise, performance will suffer due to a mismatch between energy and supply. If pace does not adjust, quote unquote, bonking or hitting the wall is inevitable. So when glycogen stores run out and fat cannot keep up with the ATP demand, blood glucose levels drop and central fatigue sets in, leading to what endurance athletes call bonking. Symptoms of bonking, if you've ever been there before, include dizziness, extreme fatigue, reduced motor control, and mental fog, often forcing the athlete to stop or drastically slow down. And what's funny, it's funny after the fact, obviously not while you're in a low point, is that you can feel great mile after mile after mile. And then when that central fatigue sets in and you feel yourself bonking, you think to yourself, well, maybe I can just slow down my mileage by about 30 seconds per mile, no big deal. Before it ultimately leads to you walking with your head down and all you're looking at is your feet and the ground in front of you. And if anyone out there has ever experienced this, you'd know that the only way to get yourself out of a bonk is to consume glucose, to increase your blood glucose, or blood sugar, just another synonymous term to use here. And when you do have some sort of sugar from a gel, candy, Gatorade, whatever, it's like the color returns to the world and you feel renewed and optimistic again. So the case in point is that we have enough stored body fat to keep fueling us for months and maybe even years. I had talked about this in a previous video that if someone has 20 extra pounds of body fat, which is not a lot, because each pound of body fat is equivalent to 3,500 calories. 20 times 3,500, I think, is 70,000. You don't need 70,000 calories to run a 50-mile race. Like, you can do it in much fewer than that. But you need to walk because fat oxidation is too slow to keep up with you running. So you would just need to walk the whole race. But since people don't want to walk, they basically bonk because they have no fuel sources. So always have gels on hand to make sure that you can keep going and going and going at a decently fast clip so you're not walking the whole race. Awesome. Third section on central fatigue and brain chemistry. Let's talk about tryptophan, serotonin, and the fatigue cascade. During prolonged endurance exercise, BCAAs decline due to muscle metabolism, tipping the balance in favor of tryptophan transport into the brain. Once inside the brain, tryptophan is converted into serotonin, or 5-HT, which is a neurotransmitter linked to lethargy, reduced motivation, and increased perceived effort. Elevated serotonin levels impair motor drive, contributing to central fatigue even when muscles remain physiologically capable. And before we move forwards, if some of you are thinking, what, serotonin makes you tired? Most people know serotonin to be a feel-good hormone, which is linked to the regulation of mood, sleep, appetite, and emotional stability. During prolonged exercise, however, when BCAAs drop, this allows more tryptophan, as we had said, to enter the brain through the blood-brain barrier and produce more serotonin. In this context, elevated serotonin contributes to central fatigue, a state where the brain reduces motor drive and motivation. It's not to say that serotonin is bad by any means. It's just that too much serotonin, too fast during exercise, can signal the brain to slow down and to protect the body. You can think of it like a dimmer switch, if this helps. Serotonin helps regulate your intensity. In daily life, it's going to brighten the mood. In ultra endurance events, it dims motor output to conserve energy. So this is just what happens as we continue to go, and this is like why you get tired. This is why you have central fatigue, is increases in serotonin because tryptophan crosses the blood-brain barrier. Awesome. Alrighty, cognitive and motor decline after hour 2. After around 2 hours of sustained effort, cognitive functions deteriorate, as you will all know, such as attention, reaction time, and decision-making abilities all suffer. Central fatigue reduces motor unit recruitment, meaning the brain sends weaker signals to muscles, even if the muscles themselves are still functional. This disconnect can lead to sloppy form, pacing errors, and increased injury risk, especially in technical terrain or late race decision points. And on this point, if you've ever run a trail race, and most of my ultras were on trails, and I think most ultras are on trails, and there's rocks, roots, stream crossings, there's switchbacks, there's going up, there's going down, there's a little bit of technical sections. You might be fine with that in the first hour, but then after hour 2, and especially after hour 10, 12, 14, 20, you just keep tripping on the same rocks. You trip on the same roots. Once I broke my big toe at mile 20 of a 50-mile race, and I just kept banging the toe into things. It hurts so bad. But that's the thing, is that when we have this increase in central fatigue, our cognitive function just tank. And for me, it was I'll keep banging my toe on rocks and roots, and I'm just going to keep going. It wasn't I'm going to look and plan things out. There's no looking and planning after hour 2, 3, 4, 5. It's just, it doesn't work. What we can do, however, is fuel. So fueling and mindset as neuroprotective tools. Carbohydrate ingestion during exercise helps maintain blood glucose and may blunt serotonin synthesis, reducing central fatigue. Even carbohydrate mouth rinsing without swallowing, so just taking in some Gatorade, swilling it around your mouth and spitting it out, has been shown to activate brain reward centers and improve performance by lowering perceived effort. A 2004 study on cyclists detailed that for athletes who rinsed with maltodextrin solution, they improved their time trial performance by around 3%, despite no metabolic contribution. So you can very much trick your brain into thinking you're having sugar. Further, mental strategies like positive self-talk, visualization, and music can modulate central fatigue by engaging dopaminergic and non-adrenergic systems, sustaining motivation and focus. And lastly, on this with central fatigue in your brain chemistry are kynurenine pathway and toxicity. So in ultra endurance events, tryptophan is also metabolized into kynurenine, KYN. When I research this, I'm still having difficulty saying this. Kynurenine, a compound linked to neuroinflammation and oxidative stress. These KYN levels rise significantly after 100-kilometer races, around 62 miles, and its neurotoxic derivatives may contribute to mental fog, mood swings, and even hallucinations. Yamada et al. Found that KYN concentrations increased after 135 kilometers of running, while serotonin levels initially spiked and then dropped. suggesting a shift towards neurotoxic metabolism. And if you ever try to run for 24 hours or run 100 miles, you would know things get really, really funky after like 70 miles. I've never hallucinated before, but my mind just goes to this place where like I don't want to talk to anyone. I kind of want to cry to get out all of the pain. Your legs hurt horribly. And yeah, I guess that's a mix of serotonin as well as KYN coming from tryptophan and neurotoxicity. So just some food for thought of what happens. Awesome. Let's now get on into the third section on gut stress and GI distress. Blood is redirected away from the gut to working muscles during exercise, which decreases intestinal perfusion and increases gut permeability. So during prolonged exercise, especially running, blood flow is prioritized to the muscles and to the skin to support movement and thermoregulation, respectively. This then reduces gastrointestinal blood flow by upwards of 80%, compromising gut integrity. This reduced perfusion leads to ischemia in the gut lining, increasing permeability, also known as leaky gut, which disrupts tight junction proteins and allows substances to cross the gut barrier. This then allows toxins, bacteria, and undigested food to enter the circulation. So GI symptoms like bloating, nausea, and diarrhea may occur. So when gut permeability increases, endotoxins like LPS and poorly digested food particles can leak into the circulation, triggering an immune response and GI distress, which are common in endurance events. And as I'd said, the symptoms of this include bloating, cramping, diarrhea, and even vomiting, and can impair performance or lead to withdrawal from a race, or better known as a DNF. So more on this is that it's really going to be the duration and the temperature which amplify GI risk, especially in runs exceeding 2 hours and in hot environments, which further reduce splanchnic blood flow and increase fluid and electrolyte loss. High carbohydrate fueling in way of 60 grams per hour or more without adequate gut training may worsen your symptoms, particularly with hyperosmolar solutions like concentrated gels. If you haven't already done so, I do this myself, and I always make sure my clients practice this as well. Training the gut. If you think about taking a walk or going on a hike or on vacation, you can walk and walk and walk all day long without really getting tired, giving you eat and you drink along the way for lunch, dinner, and snacks. Walking is low enough intensity and you're constantly fueling back up the tank that you can keep going. Like, my favorite thing is like the really lazy people who don't exercise, and they'll complain that they're too busy to like try to get in 10,000 steps. And like, these people don't do anything. They're very, very, very sedentary. And then they'll go to Disney and it's like 90 degrees in Disney all year, and they'll walk a half marathon. Because they'll go there like 7 or 8 a.m. when it opens, and they'll stay until 10 p.m. when it closes. And they're like, oh, I walked a half marathon at Disney in 90 degrees. And I'm like, yeah, like, you have it in you. You just need to go and do it, right? And this is the idea here. With running, let's just say a marathon or an ultramarathon, you can keep going and finish the race. Like, that's never going to be an issue. We have the stored body fat. We have the 70,000 plus calories we had discussed, and ample hydration opportunities. It's that most folks don't want to get cramps or side stitches or throwing up or diarrhea, so they bonk, which we had previously discussed. And when they do try and get the calories back in with something very concentrated like a gel, a block, a Gatorade, sports drinks, candy, they immediately have GI distress. So case in point is, you'll need to train your gut to take in increasingly larger amounts of carbs in order to keep your performance high without bonking and having any GI issues. It may take a couple months, it may take a couple years, while for others it might be completely fine. You might have a steel stomach. But this little aside is just for context of please remember to train your gut so you can stay on the race course. Awesome. Let's now talk about pacing science and efficiency. After 2 hours, pacing becomes critical to avoid metabolic collapse. Let me explain. Glycogen stores are nearly depleted after 90 to 120 minutes, as we had said, of moderate to high intensity endurance exercise. When this happens, the body, as we had said, shifts more towards fat and amino acid oxidation, which are two less efficient fuel sources in comparison with carbohydrates. Poor pacing early on increases energy expenditure and RPE, or rating of perceived exertion, later on in the race. Runners who start too fast suffer from premature fatigue and greater perceived exertion in later stages. The most efficient ultra runners use slight negative splits or even pacing strategies. Slight negative splits, so that means running the second half of the race faster, does correlate with better performance and fewer metabolic disturbances compared to positive splits. Even pacing conserves energy, reduces muscle breakdown, and stabilizes internal load, such as VO2 max, heart rate, and core temperature across long distances. It may be hard to not go out too hard with the pack, when the energy's all high. But if you can really be mature and hold yourself back slightly below your goal pace, slightly below your goal heart rate zone, it will pay dividends later on in the race, especially during ultras, when everyone else is slowing down and bonking and you're the one speeding up. Not only is this physiologically great for performance, but mentally great for performance as well. And I'm proud to say that in every one of my ultramarathons, and I've won one ultramarathon, won one of them, but most of them I'm not that fast. I was always like one of the people who would just speed past everyone 40, 50, 60 miles in, because I would start off really slow. And my goal for a few of my 50s and 100Ks was be the last person for the first 10 miles. And I understood it was I was young, I was 22, 23, 24. And it's why is this young kid lagging behind? And I was just jogging, and I always had my heart rate monitor out. It was at 115, 120, nice little dilly dolly, whatever thing. And then 10 miles in, 20 miles in, 30 miles in, 40, 50, 60, 70 miles in, I would start passing everyone, because I would really just take it easy early on in the race. I'd be stuffing my face with food. I'd be drinking a ton. I'd be using the bathroom, get back on the race course, keep going. And everything just kind of worked. And that was a pacing strategy that took me a while to understand. But I already had 30 or 40 marathons under my belt when I got to that stage of my running career, so to speak. So really try and do this if you can. Start slow and then beat everyone else in the second half of the race. Further on this, as fatigue sets in, more motor units are recruited to maintain your pace, especially less efficient type 2 fibers, which release oxygen, which raises oxygen cost and heart rate. This is known as cardiac drift, and the reason why it can be so hard later on in training runs and races to keep your heart rate low. Neuromuscular fatigue leads to biomechanical inefficiency, which increases metabolic cost and reduces running economy, especially after the 2-hour mark. So this then really comes to part when you can see who did their homework later on in the race and who did not do their homework in the lead up to the race. It's one of those things to say or advise a runner to keep running with good form, to have their head held high, gazing about 10 feet in front of them at the ground with their torso slightly arched forward and their shoulders retracted, which is advantageous for running economy. But we've all seen those people who are slightly hunched over to one side or leaning over forwards, which makes running and walking just very much less efficient. Their gait and their stride breaks down, energy cost and heart rate skyrocket, and everything becomes much harder. This is also the reason, or a plug really, for resistance training to build up a strong core so that you have and you can rely on the necessary musculature to continually hold you upright later on in races when the going gets tough. Next, let's go on into inflammation, hydration, and electrolyte losses. Systemic inflammation rises with duration. That should seem like an obvious statement that we're going to get more tired, more inflammation as we keep going. After around 2 to 3 hours of continuous endurance effort, the body initiates a robust inflammatory cascade. IL-6, or interleukin-6, which is a biomarker of inflammation, can spike upwards of 1,000% above baseline immediately post-race, especially in the ultra-endurance events. CRP, or C-reactive protein, peaks 24 to 72 hours post-race, indicating sustained systemic stress. So if you feel worse like the day after or 2 days after a race, just think about C-reactive protein. And then TNF-alpha responses are a little bit more variable, but elevations are linked to muscle catabolism and immune suppression. This inflammatory load contributes to post-race fatigue, soreness, and delayed recovery, and may even mimic clinical acute phase response seen in trauma. Well-trained athletes do, however, show attenuated cytokine responses, suggesting that training status modulates inflammation. So if you ever wonder how like some people on social media can just bang out 100-mile races like it's nothing in like 17 hours, it's because they did their homework. Just want to put that out there. Alrighty, next, electrolyte losses drive risk. We know that sweat contains a combination of sodium, potassium, chloride, calcium, and magnesium, some of the main electrolytes lost in sweat, but sodium specifically is lost in the highest concentrations. Average sodium loss is around 800 to 2,000 milligrams per liter of sweat, depending on genetics, heat, and pace. Hyponatremia risk increases in slower athletes who overhydrate without replacing sodium, especially in hot or humid races. Electrolyte depletion impairs nerve signaling, muscle contraction, and thermoregulation, and may trigger exercise-associated muscle cramping. And research from the Western States 100 endurance run found that 90 to 96% of the ultra runners use sodium supplements during the race, but the dosing strategies varied widely. So what do we need to do about this? Hydrate smart with electrolytes. Every ultra that I've run, I've seen loads of people drinking electrolytes and having gels, which is awesome. But I've also seen the couple of people here and there who will say, never have electrolytes, never have salt tab, just go with water and food. That is physiologically the wrong answer. We need to be putting the electrolytes back in that we're constantly losing through our sweat and through respiration or water loss. So please be safe. Drinking to thirst is now considered safer than rigid hourly hydration targets. It helps avoid both dehydration and delusional hyponatremia. Electrolyte-rich fluids like sports drinks, salt tabs, broth help maintain plasma volume, cardiac output, and sweat rate. Preloading sodium, such as in the way of 500 to 1,000 milligrams every 1 to 2 hours before race start, may improve fluid retention and reduce early-stage dehydration. Post-race, it may be best to replace 150% of fluid lost and include 1,000 to 2,000 milligrams of sodium per liter to accelerate recovery. And what I do and what I tell all my athletes to do is your pre-race meal and your post-race meal, salt the food. It tastes better, and it's going to help you hold on to water even more to keep you hydrated. It's called hyperhydration. And then all the time throughout your race and during your training, just drink electrolytes. Already last section on psychological adaptation and mental fatigue. Studies show that mental fatigue increases the rating of perceived exertion, even when physiological markers like VO2 max, heart rate, and lactate remain unchanged. This means that after hour 2, runners may feel like they're working harder than they actually are, not because their body is failing, but because their brain is tired. Mental fatigue stems from prolonged decision-making, environmental stressors, and repetitive cognitive tasks, like monitoring pace, nutrition, terrain, having a conversation with someone. In ultramarathons, this can lead to slower pacing, poor fueling decisions, and increased dropout risk, even if the body's still capable. Alrighty, now let's talk about emotional intelligence and mood stability and how they predict ultra endurance success. A 2023 review found that ultramarathoners with high emotional intelligence showed better recovery stress states and lower mood variability during and after races. Emotional intelligence helps runners regulate emotions, maintain focus, and buffer against negative psychological spirals, especially during sleep deprivation, GI distress, and hallucinations. Successful ultra runners often use cognitive strategies like mindfulness, visualization, and reframing pain to stay mentally engaged and emotionally stable. This supports the idea that psychological flexibility and emotional regulation are just as vital as grit and toughness. Awesome. To conclude, how to train and fuel smarter. Let's land this plane for today. Today we covered muscle breakdown and catabolism, fuel system transitions and fat oxidation, central fatigue and brain chemistry, inflammation, hydration, and electrolyte losses, and psychological adaptation and mental fatigue. Whether you are getting ready to toe the line for your first 50 miler, your 10th 50 miler, or just maybe nerding out on science behind long distance performance, having a strong knowledge base behind long distance performance and what it requires isn't just for the mind, but it's also leverage, and it offers a competitive advantage for pacing smarter, training better, and respecting the deep physiological complexity of human endurance. All of the science-backed insights from today are going to be important. So what I'd say to you is listen to this again, listen to my other podcasts and watch my other YouTube videos on how accordingly to eat and train, because that's when I do most of like the how, the applied. This was just like the background of what happens during races, but on a lot of my other videos, I talk about what actually to do. So I think the main thing here is that if you're going to go into an ultra marathon, whether it's going to be a 50K, which is still a lot, or a 50 miler, 100 miler, 12 hour, 24 hour, if you're going to do a 200 mile race or something, you need to fuel up the entire time. Carbs and protein, electrolytes, and, just also getting ready mentally as well. Just getting out the door 2 or 3 hours a day to get yourself on track and not getting too excited early on during the race. But that's good for today. We'll do some more follow-ups on this and watch my other videos as well to see exactly how to eat, how to train. So I do hope you enjoyed this episode today. If you did, please like, subscribe, share this with a friend, and subscribe to my podcast, Simple Science, where I do even more deep dives with respect to exercise science, nutrition, and longevity. And follow me on Instagram, where I do a little candy tidbit posts all throughout the day to keep you motivated, inspired, and educated. And as always, it is about that time of day when I'm going to go run right now. I biked yesterday, so I'm going to run today. I hope you will as well. Remember, consistency wins, and I'll catch you all in the next episode. Thanks so much for watching.